Hi everyone, I'm Maria McLachlan. First thing I want to do is say thank you to all the people who have supported my work through making donations. I really appreciate it. Right, sports and athletes. As I'm sure many of you know, the University of Otago in New Zealand has named as Sportswoman of the Year one of that country's Olympians, which is hardly surprising given that 6 out of New Zealand's 7 gold medals from the Tokyo Olympics were won by women, including 3 by canoeist Lisa Carrington, who became her country's most successful ever Olympian. She'd be in with a good chance, I would have thought. But then they also have some amazing women Paralympians too. They won all 6 of New Zealand's gold medals at the Paralympics. So who is it? Why, it's none other than Laurel Hubbard, who crashed out of the women's weightlifting competition in the first round, having failed to complete a lift. Why? Could it be because
Laurel Hubbard is a man!
Laurel Hubbard is a man!
Of course it is. I mean, it really took some courage to compete against women in an event that is all about physical strength, right? In case you're hearing squeaks, by the way, I'm still on Planet Kitten. Hopefully they'll fall asleep when they're running around. Women's sports are under threat. At least that's what is implied by a new campaign entitled Save It, See It, being waged by some beer company called Michelob Ultra. Never heard of it, but I don't drink beer. The company recently announced it was committing $100 million over the next 5 years to increase visibility for women's sports and female athletes. The company urges Instagram users to save women's sports by hitting save on images and videos of female athletes, thus boosting their visibility. Great! And which athlete have they got to front the campaign? This man. C.C. Telfer, who, when he competed in the 400 metres hurdle for his university's men's track and field team in 2017, he was placed 390th. He starts calling himself a woman, and guess what? In 2019, he came first. He wins a title. What a champ. This campaign isn't about saving women's sports, it's about normalising the presence of men in women's sports, and that's a subject I've been meaning to make a video about for quite a while, since a transgender correspondent of mine wrote this. May you expand on your belief on transgender women in female spaces and sports. Why you believe this and any possible solutions. I find both parts of this question, both about female spaces and sports, extraordinary. I mean, to me, it seems so obvious why men shouldn't be in either, but one thing I've learned from the genderists who comment on my videos is that many of them, like the beer company, Mitchell Bob or whatever it's called, seriously buy into the notion that if a man says he's a woman, then he's a woman, and vice versa. It's not just that they've drunk the Kool-Aid, it's like their brains have been boiled in it. I've talked about men in women's spaces repeatedly in other videos. I'm not going to do that here. I know that a lot of people aren't interested in sport, don't participate in it, don't follow it, don't care about it at all. The page on my website about sports and trans athletes, comprehensive though it is one of the least viewed. Over the past year, and especially during the Tokyo Olympics, there have been lots of tweets like this one. I see that TERFs now suddenly care about women's sports because 3 have competed at this Olympics. He's talking about trans athletes, not TERFs competing, and I don't think it was 3. I think there were 2 men, Laurel Hubbard and Chelsea Wolfe, who competed in women's events, but correct me if you know different. I'm disregarding the 2 female athletes who fall under the so-called trans umbrella because although they call themselves non-binary, they competed in women's events, obviously. If they truly cared, they would have donated to crowd funds for some of the athletes who struggle to get funding. Wankers. Well, how do you know they haven't? I'd wager that most of those who do genuinely care about sports, and I kind of count myself as one of them, haven't donated to those crowd funds. What sort of argument is that, wanker? The point is you don't have to care about sports to care about those who participate in them. Even those who are bored to tears by sports are capable of understanding and getting angry about the two very obvious problems of allowing men to compete in women's events. And that is, one, that it's not fair, and two, depending on the sport, it could be physically very dangerous. In respect of fairness, let's take Laurel Hubbard as an example. Here he is, aged 41, winning gold in the Pacific Olympics in Samoa in 2019. Either side of him are two young Samoan women who should have taken first and second place and probably would have had Hubbard not been allowed to compete. Silver medal winner Fea Geiger-Stowers on the left had, the previous year, at the age of 18, won gold at the Commonwealth Games held in Australia. Thanks to New Zealand's decision to select millionaire's son Hubbard, this young woman, who is a survivor of child sexual abuse and only took up weightlifting when she was living in a domestic violence refuge, was deprived of the gold medal that was rightfully hers and being able to bring glory to her tiny country in front of her home crowd. Is that unfair, or is it unfair? How can anyone not be troubled by that? Some history. In 2003, the International Olympic Committee came up with criteria for the inclusion of transgender athletes in the Olympic Games. These were that athletes must have undergone genital surgery at least 2 years previously, that there must be legal recognition of their acquired gender in their own countries, and that they must have undergone cross-sex hormone therapy for a sufficient time to minimise the natural advantages that male athletes have. 2 years was the suggested period. In 2015, those guidelines were amended. They did away with the requirement for genital surgery and legal recognition of gender. The most significant requirement is that men who want to compete against women must demonstrate a testosterone level of less than 10 nanomoles per litre. That is much higher than the average level in females, which is less than 2 nanomoles per litre. The IOC have now admitted that their rules are not fit for purpose, but they still maintain that inclusion, meaning inclusion of men in women's events, is important. So still kowtowing to an ideology that is hurting women. Let's look at the bad arguments proffered by the cultists. A couple of years ago, before the Tokyo Olympics, I wrote a blog post called Trans Rights for the Confused and Bewildered. It was a takedown of an idiotic article posted on Medium called Trans Rights for the Confused and Bewildered, in which, under the heading Trans Women Have an Unfair Advantage in Sports, a certain numbskull had asserted, "There is no evidence to suggest this is true." This is such a patently absurd and dishonest thing to say. Before we even look at any sciencey stuff, you only have to look at a few pictures and have a brain larger than a pea to see an advantage. Let's take Hannah Mountsie, who once played handball for the Australian national men's team. Okay, here, even though he has now supposedly turned into a woman, he still looks like quite a big man, but show him with his female teammates and he disappears. He doesn't stand out at all, right? Here he is playing against an Iranian female side. Can you spot him? It's hard, I know, but a clue is that he's the one who doesn't have to cover his hair. I'm embarrassed for him. Now, just in case you're thinking, poor Hannah, he may look like a great hulking giant of a bloke, but he's obviously a woman at heart with natural empathy for women. Look at this. He was dropped from the Australian women's handball team because teammates didn't want to get changed and shower with him. Gosh, they were so mean. The crucial information that is missing from the headline is found deep in the article. He refused a management request to use a separate changing room because female teammates felt uncomfortable with this big bloke being around them while they were undressed. What an absolute swine. Oh, here's Gabby Ludwig. Which one do you think is the 50-year-old man in this college basketball team? And what's he doing there anyway? Don't tell me that being nearly 2 meters tall isn't an advantage in women's basketball. I mean, what a find. Anyway, going back to that Medium article, whilst this is counterintuitive to some people, blah, 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 the evidence is against this position. Really? And your idea of evidence is? There are no elite athletes in women's sports who are trans women. Since 2004, when trans women were invited to take part in the Olympics, there has yet to be a trans qualifier. That's not evidence of anything except the writer being thick as mince. Let's deal with the first part. There are no elite athletes in women's sport who are trans women. I've seen that argument made quite a lot on Twitter. Note that the original claim from this bloke was that trans-identifying men have no advantage over women in women's sport. He didn't say anything about elite athletes at the start. Sport matters to people at every level. For many people, it's how they get their exercise, build friendships, get a sense of achievement, relief from stress. You don't have to be an elite athlete for sport to be a really important part of your life, and every man or boy who gets selected for a women's or girls' sports side, be it at school or college or work or Sunday league or whatever, is taking a place from a woman or girl. You're male. Apply for the men's team. Since he mentions elite athletes, what does that actually mean? Surely someone who is picked to play for their country's national team for an international competition counts as elite? This guy did zero research. I've already mentioned Hannah Mounsey, who played for Australia. See the big dude at the back there? He's not the team coach or someone's dad. That is Savannah Burton, who in 2012 he played for the Canadian national men's dodgeball team, and 3 years later, having become a lady, he helped the Canadian women's dodgeball team to a bronze medal in the World Dodgeball Federation World Championships of 2015. Cheats. That Medium article was written only a few months after cyclist Rachel McKinnon, now known as Veronica Ivy, had boasted of being a world champion. That sounds pretty elite to me. And there he is the following year in that typical womanly pose, holding onto his title, cheating another woman out of her place on the podium and in the medals table. Since 2004, when trans women were invited to take part in the Olympics, there has yet to be a trans qualifier. As I said, the article was written in 2019, before the last Olympics, so the claim was true at the time, but it isn't true anymore. The reasoning is flawed anyway. How many trans-identifying male athletes were there even back in 2016, 2012, 2008, 2004, and given the stringent requirements of having to have genital surgery and a legal status as the other sex, which many countries didn't even offer and still don't, how many would have been eligible to qualify? That's just unadulterated stupidity, and yet loads of people seem to think it's a real argument. It isn't. Now, let's turn to our old friend Samantha Lux. Sorry.
Trans girls just want to play the sport that they love, just like their cisgender peers.
This "we just want to play the sport we love" is the same as "we just want to pee." Fine, play the sport you love and then go pee, but do it with other male people. I mean, they don't just want to play the sport they love, they want to compete for sports scholarships, titles, places on national teams and medals tables, and every time a trans-identifying male competes in women's events, he displaces a woman, often one who has worked hard for the privilege of doing so in a fair competition. Stop trying to claim you're the victim here. Samantha quotes from an article by the ACLU entitled "The Coordinated Attack on Trans Student Athletes." An article you probably won't be surprised to hear is unbelievably dishonest and makes no mention of the impact on sportswomen of men competing in their sport. This is the American Civil Liberties Union, after all.
This quote from the ACLU says, "In reality, trans women and girls have been competing in women's sports at all levels around the world. Despite the hundreds, if not thousands, of trans women competing, only a handful have had any success at the high school and collegiate level.
This is essentially the same bad argument made about elite athletes, only even more disingenuous. Hundreds, if not thousands? Really? Where'd you get that figure from? Well, it's not even a figure, is it? Could be hundreds, could even be thousands. Citation needed. A reference to the research that shows there are hundreds or thousands of men and boys competing in women's sports all around the world, or I call bullshit. Now, the more serious argument is also mentioned in that ridiculous Medium article, but only the bare minimum, because I think the writer knows that he doesn't know what he's talking about and he doesn't want to get in too deep. Muscle mass and strength drop dramatically due to female estradiol, which is an estrogen, and testosterone levels. And the argument which is implicit in this claim is made in no uncertain terms by others. For example, within 2 years, a male's physical advantages over a woman's in sports are completely erased using hormonal therapy. No. Emma Hilton is a developmental biologist at Manchester University. In 2020, she and Tommy Lundberg, whose PhD is in sports science and who works as a clinical physiologist at Karolinska University Hospital in Sweden, published an important paper entitled Transgender Women in the Female Category of Sport: Perspectives on Testosterone Suppression and Performance Advantage. I will, of course, link to this paper below, and it really is worth a read if you're interested in the fine details of the topic, because obviously I can't do it justice here. I'll keep what I say about it brief. Firstly, the authors review the differences in biological characteristics between males and females and examine how those differences affect sporting performance. They show that because of elevated testosterone levels at puberty, in most sports, men have significant advantages over women. Here is a table from the study showing male performance advantage over females in various sports. The female level in light grey is set to 100%, the male level is in dark grey, and as we can see on the left, the male advantage in rowing and swimming is only 10% compared to, say, weightlifting, third from right, which shows an advantage of about 34%. I see the advantage for golf driver speed is around 20% and the advantage for golf long drive is over 30%. Do you know about Lana Lawless? Transitioned in 2005 and then started playing professional golf. In 2008, he won the Women's World Championship in long drive golf. So another elite transgender sportsman who supposedly doesn't exist. At some stage, he sued the Ladies Professional Golfing Association, forcing them to remove their requirement that athletes have to be female to compete. Back to the paper. Secondly, they evaluate the studies that have measured elements of performance and physical capacity following testosterone suppression and find that men generally maintain bone mass over the course of at least 24 months of testosterone suppression. One study they looked at concluded that BMD, bone mineral density, is preserved over a median of 12.5 years. They conclude that sporting advantage conferred by skeletal size and bone density would be retained despite testosterone reductions compliant with the IOC's current guidelines. This is of particular relevance to sports where height, limb length and handspan are key. For example, basketball, volleyball, handball, and where high movement efficiency is advantageous. Reviewing the literature on muscle and strength metrics, there is some evidence to suggest that, contrary to what is claimed in that Medium article, estrogen replacement has a protective effect on muscle mass. They conclude that current evidence does not support the claim that the male performance advantage established by testosterone at puberty and translating in elite athletes to a 10 to 50% performance advantage is lost by testosterone suppression in accordance with the requirements of the IOC. Of course, a lot of high school and trans-identifying male athletes don't even take wrong-sex hormones. I'm sure I've mentioned these two before. Between them, Terry Miller and Andrea Yearwood hold 15 Connecticut State Championship titles in women's athletics. Here's Selena Sewell.
Once the gun went off, the two transgender athletes took off flying and left all of us girls in the dust. I knew right then and there that some girls would be missing out on great opportunities to succeed, and that women could be completely eradicated from their own sports.
You can go through a male puberty and just say you're a girl. You don't even have to have started wrong-sex hormone therapy, and you are allowed to compete and destroy girls' chances of sports scholarships and titles. I don't understand how anyone can be okay with this, but they are. Right. As to the physical danger aspect, it is surely patently obvious that in those sports where the objective is to hurt your opponent, men should not be competing against women. And yet they are. I never thought I'd have reason to thank Piers Morgan, but he nails it here. It is insanity. He's referring to this man, a war hero. Served 6 years in the US military, got 8 service medals, retired from the army, completed a fine arts degree, transitioned, and then thought, what would I be real good at? Now 38 years old, Alana McLaughlin only took up mixed martial arts earlier this year. His opponent, Celine Provost, whom he beat in his debut fight, has been doing it for over a decade. Amongst his congratulatory supporters, naturally, was retired MMA fighter Fallon Fox, who is another one who took up the sport only after transitioning and who delivered an orbital bone fracture and concussion to Tamika Brent in the first round. She's a strong woman who had only ever fought strong women before, and she said she'd never felt a blow like it. And apparently she wasn't the only woman he knocked out and boasted about enjoying it on Twitter. He's just a Baroness Hunt. By the way, the reason I haven't said anything about women athletes with elevated testosterone levels is that I just don't feel I know or understand enough about those situations and athletes like Caster Semenya. I'm not a sports scientist or physiologist or anything. Having an upper limit on female athletes' testosterone levels sounds reasonable to me, but I don't know. I can only talk about men competing in women's sports thanks to Emma and others because of their scholarly research being easily available. So, what is the solution? Asked my correspondent. I can't tell you how annoying I find the expectation that women struggling to hold on to our sex-based rights should come up with a solution that might keep men happy. The solution is to keep women's sports single-sex. Okay, as mediocre male athletes, they won't win any medals, but if all they want to do, as Samantha Lux claims, is play the sport they love, I'm sure they'll find some lowly men's club that will take them on. This notion that we want to exclude trans people from sport is just another lie. We want to exclude men from women's sport. They don't belong in them. The British Sports Council Equality Group does offer a solution in its recently published report. It recommends 2 categories, female only, and instead of male only, a category that is open to all athletes and that trans people compete in that one. Sounds good to me. No doubt trans-identifying men will say it invalidates them as women, but what's wrong with that? They're not women. So if there is a positive note to end on, it is that the SCEG report, having looked at the most up-to-date evidence, has stated in no uncertain terms that we cannot be inclusive of men in women's events and guarantee fairness and safety for women. It is now up to the various sports governing bodies to take that on board and stop prioritising the feelings of men. That is all. Thanks for watching. Bye.